Welcome to the Biz News webinar. And today we're going to focus on the changing world, the virtual world that we work and live in. And that virtual world is also bringing us a whole number of challenges. Andrew Whitaker, who's responsible for business development as well as the security issues within the Altron Group, is my guest today. And also want to welcome you, our attendees, and to inform you that at any given time, feel free to post your questions and we will raise them with Andrew, who is our special guest here. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. We appreciate.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's lovely to be here today.
And we've decided on the topic, state of security and the future of predictive identity. Before you talk us through this presentation and give us more information regarding this, just tell me, what is the attitude towards security within the Altron Group, you being one of the champions of security issues within the group? Tell me more.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. And hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here this morning to tell you more about Altron, our approach to security, and some of the challenges we're helping customers with. Security is vitally important to Altron. It's pervasive across our group in everything that we do. But additionally, it's also something that we're partnering with South African customers to help them address the challenges, especially coming out of COVID, that a larger attack surface is creating. So not only do we do security in everything here at Altron, but we also have a dedicated division, which I lead, called Altron Security. And the aim here is to assist our customers in really understanding what the challenges are that are going to move the needle most. And a lot of that's the topic of our presentation today. What should we be focusing on as security leaders that can really help solve security challenges?
Well, before you go into the presentation, just give me your broad sense of what transpired this past year as a result of COVID-19. I mean, there are people like yourself and other experts who are in the IT field and are paying attention to these things. But for a lot of us as ordinary folk, we're not paying attention to the changes that happened overnight, so to speak. We stayed at home. Now I've got to adjust, have meetings via Zoom and Microsoft and on webinars and stuff like that. So what happened in the South African context, you think, the extent to which people were made to stay at home and work virtually?
Absolutely. And the impact that that had on security. You know, just before the lockdown happened, organizations were grappling with all sorts of disruptive technologies that were changing things for the better. You know, cloud means that we don't need to have large IT assets on site anymore. We can be using services that we subscribe to on the internet. Digital transformation has been changing the landscape for many years for what consumers expect from brands. And I think a lot of organizations were already trying to grapple with all these challenges and how we secure all these new things. And then COVID happened, everybody went home, and all of a sudden, the things that we were trying to access from an IT perspective were on the internet. Our users were sitting at home, and all the great security controls that people had invested in were sitting back at the office and not really being effective in securing anymore. Over the last year, we've seen a tremendous number of breaches across sectors here in South Africa, financial services and insurance, healthcare, sadly. And I think organizations now today, hopefully coming out of the first and second waves, are now looking at how to adapt their IT organizations to better secure their environments. It's not an easy journey, but there's a lot of disruptive technology, as I said in the beginning, that can really help us to be able to more feasibly accommodate that.
So tell me, what have you prepared for us? Let's take a look at this.
Thanks, Tim. I'm going to present in 3 waves during this session today. I'm going to start at the high level and give what I think my opinion is to the solution. But maybe before we get into what is the simple solution to a new and more modern security, let's just repeat a few of the things that we said there. You know, really, everyone's world's been disrupted. Things have been changing for a long time as it comes to IT and digital transformation, even more so not most recently. Some of these things that we've seen in the last year, obviously the pandemic, but also an accelerated cloud adoption. Now that people are working from home, it makes even more sense to be making use of services in the cloud. And then a further acceleration of digital transformation. Every organization that had a brick and mortar store has, over the last 12 months, taken a look as to how they can reposition themselves on the internet. That means that we as consumers have so much more choice But that choice also means that we need to be able to differentiate between the various brands. And ultimately, the only way we can do that these days is by the digital experience. That digital experience needs to be great. It needs to look good. It needs to be seamless, but it needs to be secure. And that's a delicate balancing act. And then lastly, organizations internally are facing the challenges of less contact and more work to be done. That's putting a lot of burden on people. And because of that, a lot of the security elements that we help customers implement need to be smarter. We can't do things like they were before. We can't do things that adds additional effort onto business. We need to do things in a more automated fashion. So just the context of the presentation today, and perhaps I'll wrap up with these 4 points at the end and hopefully tick some boxes as to how security is not making this more difficult, but actually enabling these points. Just to repeat some of these in maybe a different context, in a different language. The IT analyst organization Gartner says very similar things. Looking forward into 2021 last year, they were saying really that there are 4 critical areas that organizations needs to be investing in. Number 1, it's people centricity. Ultimately, everything that happens in an organization is about the people. Could be the people that work there, our suppliers, or our customers. Secondly, we have to now be location independent. There's no chance that we can only offer certain services in a particular place. People need to be able to work from anywhere in the world. The same applies to security. Security can't be strong in one place and weak in others. It needs to be able to apply location independently. And then lastly, what we're delivering needs to be resilient. That's perhaps more important than ever before now. Organizations needs to be able to make use of disruptive technologies to be able to do things better. And that's our topic today. How do we make use of things? Our title there was predictive identity. Really what we're trying to get to is how do we use things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automation to do the security things that typically we were doing manually before, and hopefully do it a lot better than what humans can do it. We've touched on a few of these challenges, and I just want to expand on 2 of them. The one is cloud. So far, I've been talking about how organizations are adopting cloud. And obviously, cloud means many things to different people. It could be a service in the cloud, software as a service, but it could also be moving an IT environment into the cloud, infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And often we're doing that to many cloud vendors. It's not just Microsoft Azure, it could be Amazon Web Services as well. So organizations are left with very large cloud infrastructure, multi-cloud vendor infrastructure that needs to be secured. And we got to take that into account. But equally on the other side of cloud, a lot of security capabilities are now found in the cloud. So if we do this right, we can get the benefits of cloud by making use of security as a service through the cloud platforms. And then secondly, we've already touched on how digital transformation is changing the world and how consumers are vitally important in terms of the digital experience that we're creating through digital transformation. But also it's important to remember that now that we're digitally transforming, there's a lot of different kinds of people that we're interacting with. It's not only the consumer on the right, they're very important, but all of a sudden we're now managing things. Cars are instrumented. Robotics is playing more and more of a role in automation. So identities are really all over the show. And to summarize a solution to all of this, in the old world, we used to put perimeters around things, put people in boxes and say, well, everything inside the box is nice and safe. We used to use firewalls for doing this perhaps. And we trusted some people, and other times we would verify them, and that world's gone. There's this principle today of zero trust. Zero trust is also called identity-defined security, where we know about all the identities that need to interact in our IT organization, whether it's the customer or the workforce or a device or a robot. We trust none of them. We verify every single one of them. We do that in a very strong way to make sure we really know who the person is behind the transactions, not a username and password. Got great ways of doing that now with mobile phones and the like. And then we ensure that they have the most least privilege to do what they need to do at that moment in time. Gone are the days of people having large amounts of access to all of IT. They should only have the most minimal amount of access. And really, the topic of our presentation today is delving into this world of zero trust. But what I've just said up until now sounds easy, rolls off the tongue nicely, but actually it's incredibly complicated. And organizations, our customers, are grappling with this massively. It's not easy stuff. However, if you approach it using some of the more modern, disruptive technologies that are available today, I'm hoping it can be easy. And that's what we'd like to discuss. But perhaps I can just pause here for a second and just backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about history, because none of this is new. I'm sure many of you in the audience today are nodding and thinking we've been managing people and their access to IT forever, and it's never stopped being a problem. It's still a problem today. Back in the early 2000s, this concept of identity management came around. Someone joins the company. Why don't we automatically set them up? Why don't we create the user accounts that is needed for him to be able to log into his laptop and access his email? And these solutions were great, especially from a security perspective, because if someone leaves the company, well, we can disable his access automatically, and that's a great security control to have in place. And then that matured and developed, so we started wondering less about the user accounts and more about the access, because ultimately it's the access that people have that causes the ability for them to perhaps commit fraud or be trusted less. So we started implementing solutions. The industry termed it identity governance and administration, and there were laws that came out internationally. In the US, one of them is called Sarbanes-Oxley, and it tells organizations that are listed in the United States, you need to review users' access to financially sensitive systems once every 3 months. And so we started doing that. Here in South Africa, there's a lot of companies that are dual listed in the US. And as more South African companies started reviewing who's got access to what, they began to realize that this is not the easiest job. It's complicated and difficult. Line managers need to do it, and many times they're regulated and told to do it. We have a customer. They've got 5 divisions in their organization. One of the divisions got 7,500 people that work in it, 700 line managers. And in this one division, once a year, they need to review everyone that's got access to financially relevant systems. So they get shown via a website as a line manager on a regular basis. This is the access for the people that report to you. And they need to go through those one by one and say whether that access needs to stay or be removed. This is some of the basis of identity governance. Of course, though, a business person doesn't really know what they're looking at here. Hopefully, we've tried to make this business friendly. If we look at the screen, you know, there's Azure end user base access to DocuSign app. Maybe that makes sense to them. I'm an IT guy, it makes sense to me, but probably to most of business, this doesn't make sense. And what we've seen, these are some real results of analysis that we've done in that division at that previous customer. What we've seen is that the governance, the compliance activity that we're giving to line of business, asking them to pay attention to who's got access to what in their division for those people that report to them, is not really being done effectively. We're seeing once a year only 7% of the access that people got being taken away, and that doesn't make sense to us. Normally in the beginning of these initiatives, we see a lot more, 30%, 40%, 50% of access being removed. That sounds better. But as line of business starts doing these governance and compliance tasks, slowly their attention perhaps to the detail reduces. So the question that comes back to us is, how do we do this better? How do we as security practitioners make that dream of zero trust in the beginning better? It's all possible, but a lot of it today still requires a lot of people intervention. If we want to make sure that people have the least access to do their job, well, we need line of business to play a role in that up until now. But the top of this iceberg that I'm showing is looking at people and their access. Luckily today, we have wealths of more information about a person and what they mean in the organization and the risk that they pose. And perhaps there's much better ways of doing things. So we are working with our customers to take their least privileged solutions and find ways of tailoring the governance and compliance activity. On the left-hand side, we're looking things at a macro level, at the entire organization, and saying, what are the business roles in an organization that are risky? And perhaps what are the systems that are risky? And once we know who the risky people are, because they have risky roles or have access to risky systems, maybe we focus only on those. Maybe we focus our governance only on the risky people. And all the way on the left-hand side takes longer to do, but ultimately we would like at a divisional level within organizations to understand in terms of their business processes, what's risky and what's not risky. Ultimately, we want to get to this, what's high risk, medium risk, and low risk, and focus on the high risk stuff. We want to be risk aware. That means we can start doing processes like what's shown on the screen here. This is the life of a person in a corporate South African organization. They join, their access is automatically assigned. They're low risk. They do their job, they work, they ask for a little bit of access, they're still low risk. Eventually, they ask for enough access, they become medium risk. Maybe there's some additional controls put in place about them. Maybe all of a sudden when they log in, they're now being asked to provide some form of stronger authentication. At some point, They have so much access, they become high risk. Now we're every month asking the line manager, do you know this individual has this high risk access? And we're putting much stronger controls on that individual, because if their credentials are stolen, that's where the risk is in the organization. Ultimately, they drop back down in terms of the risk they pose. And again, we reduce the burden on line of business for having to be involved at looking at these individuals. But I got a stop sign again, because everything that I've set up until now sounds feasible, sounds great, I hope, but there's still problems in that. It's still difficult, still not easy to do. So dropping down one level further, and this is where we start taking a look at the science fiction stuff. This is where we start taking a look at those disruptive controls that can really make this easier. Because I talked in halfway through a second phase there about how we could put people in buckets and say, well, you've got this role and you've got that role, and therefore you're risky. The reality in South African companies is we don't have roles anymore. You don't rock up at work and all of a sudden, this is your job, and therefore you need access to this bunch of stuff in IT. Gone are those days. We work in projects, we work in teams. What we need access to changes on a weekly basis. But on the screen, we're showing a peer group analysis utilization of machine learning. These are capabilities that we now find embedded in many of our security controls. And what we're looking at here is not top down. It's not saying human resources says Tim Medise has this job function. Rather, it's saying, by looking at the kind of access you have, I think you're similar to all these other kinds of people. And now we can group you together in a collection of peers. Not only can we group you together. Sorry, Tim, you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm jumping in much earlier than I should.
Please.
But I was thinking of a couple of things that happen, the environments that people work in, for instance, and then the individuals that are affected by what you are talking to us about here may not be IT savvy type people who understand their roles in terms of what they're supposed to perform for the company or the enterprise, but may not know that they are doing so facilitated by the technology that's behind everything. In other words, integrating understanding of technology on one hand and your role in the enterprise on the other. Because it's a transition that many individuals are going through. We still see technology as something separate from what you do anyway, irrespective of having to log in or whatever or participate, but you regard that process as separate from your function or role within the organization. So tell me, any particular environment as an example, how are these things manifesting themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And you get different kinds of companies. Some are far more structured than others. If you take a look at a retail bank, you go into the branch, often you'll find someone who is a teller, and that's a pretty defined job. Or maybe they're a foreign exchange teller. They got different physical stuff sitting under their desk. Some have got check printers, others have got cash dispensers, others have got the ability to get foreign exchange. These are different kinds of IT access that's needed, but I mean, it's real physical, touchable stuff. And I suppose in those worlds, those people understand their role much better. But if we look at a modern knowledge worker today, if you look in a corporate South African organization, head office environment, people fulfill many roles, lots of hats, and those hats change often. It's the agility of the workplace today, new ways of working, allowing people to build teams, agilely build a product, and then move on to the next thing. And that really does create problems for what we're trying to do here. When we're trying to put security in place in the past, it was all about rules and logic and control. But today, that can't be the case. It's just not possible. Today, we need to be adaptable and flexible, and we need to be thinking about the end user, and we need to be thinking about their boss as well, the line manager. Again, a long time ago, IT was trying to take a lot of this responsibility for developing the structure of who people are, what they do, and what they need. But do they know? I mean, IT doesn't know. IT doesn't know what's really happening out in the business. It's the business that knows. So bridging that divide is very, very difficult, Tim. And I think you've really touched a nerve there, the gap between what's happening in the organization, in the business, and what people need to do their job versus what IT has and what IT wants to provide. And I think it's a never-ending battle to try and catch up in that regard. But again, many of the things we're talking about today hopefully show how, especially security, is thinking more about the actual person rather than just putting the security in place that we need. The security for a long time was control. But if we start looking at the broader digital transformation concept, right, security can't be about control. Customers want a great experience. They don't want gates and locks and checks in place for everything. So I know as a security professional, certainly in the last 2 years, my mindset has changed tremendously from about how we stop people from doing everything to rather how we enable business. I think that's a great change, a change that all of IT is seeing.
I suppose machine learning will help us understand further what you were still talking about, that it can control the amount of access you have as well as the experience you have being part of the virtual interaction. Tell us more.
Exactly. And in that rigorous environment we were talking about earlier, where we're defining people in boxes wearing hats that have a particular role, that's not possible. That's not going to happen anymore. So where we were talking earlier about machine learning is how that we could rather look from the bottom up and let machine learning that can look at a lot more information to try and identify patterns that we can, to be able to see people, things that human resources knows about them, as well as the access that they have, and to be able to put them into groups of peers. And once we know those groups, then we've truly bucketed people in the reality of what they look like today. If I just click play here, not only what they look like today, because this stuff changes all the time. What Tim's doing today and what you're going to do in a month from now, I'm sure Tim is vastly different things. And for that reason, we need to be cognizant of the fact of how people change and the teams.
I agree. I mean, but how do we predict all of these things? Reflecting back a couple of months ago and trying to anticipate 2-3 months to come, it's very difficult. But there we are.
Absolutely, and for us as individuals, it's difficult. And imagine for our Altron Security customers who have 65,000 employees, and they're trying to create this great work experience for them, where access to things are at the click of a button, but we still have security. It's difficult. But as we were showing in these last 2 slides, having the ability to know how people are grouped together, it's just a fundamental piece of information that can really help us provide better security. I'm going to show you a few ways now. Firstly, it seems simple, but we're able to tell how people's access has changed over time. From a security perspective, we weren't able to do that in the past. We were just looking at the current state, what people have now. That means we can now start trending and seeing what's happening in the organization. Why did this group of people need this access? I didn't think they did. It allows us to be more intelligent in the decisions we make about what access we give to people. Speaking about being intelligent, though, about what we're doing, we can now make recommendations. And this is really where the utilization of peer group analysis becomes so important. If we want to make sure that people have the least access to do their job, well, when a line manager reviews a bunch of people that report to him, they should be able to have some more information about why that access is relevant for this person's job, not just a description of what they're asking for. And here we can see some recommendations are being presented to the manager during a review of users' access, showing them that everybody else that's similar to this person, maybe not in the same team, but looks similar from peer group analysis perspective, have this access. So go ahead, approve it. In fact, maybe we even automate these things. If the machine learning says these people have something in common and their access that he's asking for is common for that group, well, let's go ahead and automatically approve it, or maybe not approve it, depending on the decision that needs to be taken. Talk about the line manager. What about the end user? Maybe we can now start showing Tim what you need to have access to, based upon the kinds of peers you have, based upon how we've seen you and your role in the organization. We can now start recommending things to you. What a better way for you to find what you need access to in a large organization that's complex with a lot of systems than to have it recommended to you based on the teams that you belong to. And lastly, for security and compliance, we can make their lives easier as well, because ultimately they want to bundle things into access and create that forever and say, well, we've looked at this data long enough and it looks to us like if someone has this job function, they should have this group of access. And then we save that, and forevermore, if someone gets that role, they get that access. And let the machine learning constantly monitor these roles. And if anything changes in terms of that peer group and a bunch of people in that peer group start getting more access, then we can automatically recommend that that access should be added into that role. This is making the lives of a lot of different people much, much easier. It's making the lives of business easier. It's making the lives of employees that work in the company much easier. It's making the lives of the security, compliance, and risk divisions easier.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
can we pause for a moment there, Andrew? Miles Forey has sent in a question here, and let me invite the other attendees to do the same. If you have a question, feel free
absolutely.
to post the question at any given time. We do have this presentation. We'll be going through several points with Andrew Whitaker in a moment, but on your side, feel free to raise whatever questions at any given time you want. Miles Forey wants to know, how much has the security market grown in the last year, and what is the average growth rate, and what do you predict for the next 3 to 5 years?
I wish I had the numbers at the top of my head to be able to share it accurately with you, but perhaps I can talk subjectively from my opinion of how we've seen the security market. Certainly, I think every industry in our country has taken a hit in the last 12 months. It's been very difficult to be able to do business and interact with customers. However, there are certainly certain investments that we see our customers still needing to make to ensure that the right posture in their organization is kept, at least maintained, if not improved. And certainly security is one of those themes. Gartner, that analyst that I was referring to earlier, have coined a term about the pandemic that's about to hit cybersecurity. Not the COVID-19 pandemic, but the repercussions of COVID-19. That is that the last year, the impact of the last year and the change on the IT organization means that cybersecurity is going to have to massively catch up with this whole new IT world. Everything looks different today. It's architected differently, deployed differently. We were heading in the direction that we are today before the pandemic, but we've certainly got there a lot quicker than what anyone's expected. So certainly we're seeing year-on-year growth in the cybersecurity field. There's many areas in that. From an Altron Security perspective, we really think that there are 4 critical areas that our customers need to invest in. We're talking about one of those topics today. It's about identity. If you simplify the whole IT down, what are you left with? You're left with a bunch of people that want to do things. So first and foremost, in terms of security, we need to secure the people. Those could be the people that work for us. They could be our third-party suppliers, and they could be our customers. That's 3 very different conversations. Today, we're talking largely about the people that work for us. But the people that supply stuff to us often have also very sensitive access. But because they don't work for us, we don't know them very well. That can be a difficult thing to manage. And then lastly, the customer. Obviously, the customer is king. Creating a great customer experience is one of the most important things an organization needs to do. But all of that experience can be thrown away in a second. Because if a customer loses trust in our brand, well, it's all gone. So balancing security that ensures trust in our brand with digital experience is a tightrope that organizations are walking on at the moment. I think all of what I've just said there, managing the workforce more securely while they're working from home, all the way through to managing customers and ensuring brand trust, is a board level conversation. You know, we can sit here and talk about it, and we're not a bunch of IT engineers. You know, it's very relevant.
Well, something that is of public interest is raised by Clive here. Who wants to know, what impact will the implementation of the POPI Act have on security, especially with remote working?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So I was saying earlier, we at Altron Security think that there's really 3 areas that our customers are most pressed in. The one is managing the identities. The second, I was saying, simplify all our IT. What are you left with? People and data. So the second area of our speciality is around data privacy. And then lastly is around cloud. But that question was spot on, because, you know, if we're talking about the people, what are they trying to access? They're trying to access data. Or if they're a customer, what do we have about them? We have data. So both of those topics, identity and data, are just so relevant in terms of the POPIA Act. POPIA now comes into effect in July of this year. I know many of our customer organizations are at very late stage looking at how they comply, if not already putting in place the right abilities to comply. And we can separate that conversation into two areas. I think the one area is that organizations have a lot of data. Having a lot of data, some of it is in a very safe place, in structured places. But today we're creating a lot of data on our endpoints, on laptops sitting at home, storing it in OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint. And the question is, how much data is not sitting in those very, very safe places? So I know a lot of our customer organizations are taking a look at scanning their IT organization, finding customer sensitive data. And once they found that, putting it in a safe place, making sure they know about it and can track it, because POPIA requires us to know about it, track it, apply policy to it, and get rid of it when we're meant to get rid of it. Additionally, customers have a number of fundamental rights in terms of POPIA. The one is they have a right to know what you have about me. Secondly, they also have the right to say, forget me. And thirdly, they have the right to keep their information up to date. Now, those three elements are not the easiest to do when you're a large organization. So the ability to know where that data is, firstly, to have a record of where it's stored, but then also going back to the identity side, to give a customer ability to be known as a person and to be able to, with our brands, be seen as one thing with a collection of personal information associated to it is a fundamental right these days. And many organizations up until now have different legs to their business. They've got an insurance arm, they've got a retail bank, they've got an investment division, they've got home loans and finance. I'm using a banking sector because they have the most product houses often. Imagine how difficult it is to be seen as one person across that. And you know, that's the change POPIA is going to make now. POPIA is going to require that organizations know about me, Andrew, and allow me to see all the information they have about me, keep it up to date, and give consent to how it's shared. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I don't think everyone's got all the answers yet, but I definitely see organizations paying particular attention to identity and the data that we have. Those two topics are just so relevant today.
We've got a couple of points to go through the presentation, right? But I do have a couple of questions for you. What do you think we should do? Deal with
Absolutely.
the questions now or continue?
I've got four more slides to wrap up, so you carry on.
Sure. Nico Maruleni wants to know, asks, are employees being educated about the potential security risks that lie with doing work online? I think that's a very important point, that people who work mostly online should appreciate the risks attached to that. But is it happening enough, you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations take very seriously the communication that they make to the people that work in their organizations around a range of things. And of course, security is part of that. I think, however, a lot of the frustration that employees feel, the workforce feel often, is that we're being told a lot of things and what's right and what's wrong from a compliance perspective. And the messaging that we need to be giving to people does perhaps need to be tailored to the topics that are relevant at the time. There's a lot of compliance that needs to be done in big organizations and small organizations as well, and getting that message across to the people in the organization is difficult. Look, there's a lot of great tools, South African, locally proud, made in South Africa, tools for being able to communicate good security messaging out to the workforce. We see a lot of our customers investing heavily in those and making sure that they're tailoring those to the messages to our customers. But I think that's a great question that Nico's asked there, which is, you know, how are we communicating not the past, which is, you know, how do us as employees protect what we've been given, but how do we do that now when we're working probably from a bring your own device and sitting at home? Things certainly have become more difficult to be able to do in terms of understanding IT and security. Now, again, from my perspective, being a security practitioner, I think our responsibility is to educate, but also to give those people the tools to be able to protect themselves in the simplest of ways possible. And again, I think we're seeing so many things be available that allows us to help people secure themselves in an easy way. We just need to get to that level of maturity a lot quicker. If you think about any of the big cloud service providers, look at Google, look at Facebook, look at Instagram. These cloud platforms inherently have some of the strongest level of security built into them, but you often don't see it. You don't see it because it's what we're calling risk aware and intelligent. It sits in the background, monitors your behavior, and if something changes with you, suddenly you go overseas. Remember the days when you were able to travel? Now something's changed. You're in a different geographic location. Suddenly, it's stronger authentication. We're now sending push notifications to your phone to make sure that it's you. So, there's a balance. We do need to communicate to people and tell them what their responsibility is. We absolutely need to educate people on the dangers of working from home and being more on the internet than in the past. But equally, there's great technology to be able to make the lives of people more secure, both the customer and the workforce, Tim.
Now, Nick van Riet wants to know, says, won't you say, from your point of view, security point of view, that as a customer, one now has virtually no access to information, that most companies use subcontract workers to answer emails, and they are not on a need-to-know access, so cannot answer your questions, leading to many, many emails being fired off to the particular company for simple questions that customers need responses to very urgently?
Yeah. So there's, I think, two parts to that, and thanks for the question. So organizations today do heavily depend on subcontracting parties to be able to, for example, process data. And if we think to the legislation we were talking about earlier, POPIA, that has implications, because when someone works for us and they're accessing our customers' information, well, we manage them well because they're signing employment agreements, and there's good, strong bonds between us and the people that we're salaried employees of. That said, though, these third-party data processors, third-party organizations, we don't necessarily know about the people behind the transactions, but we do have the company-to-company relationships. And certainly what I've been seeing over the last 2 years is the ever increasing diligence being applied to the contracts between companies to ensure that third parties protect information as strongly as the organization that had the data in the first place. But look, we can't only rely on agreements between organizations. And again, I'm a security practitioner, so I'm going to come back to the tools and technologies that I'm seeing that are making this more successful today. There's initiatives internationally. In Australia, they call it open business. In the UK, they call it open banking. Whatever you call it, there are standards appearing, legislation appearing that dictates how an organization, when working through a third party, makes sure that the end customer behind what needs to happen is giving their approval for things every time. If you take an example of, in South Africa, there's a popular investment website. That website, when you go to it, you're able to add a number of bank accounts so that the investment website can get a view as to your spending habits and make suggestions to you on how you could be saving more, helping you with budgeting. It's a novel idea. However, how does that investment website get access to that information? It's certainly not through organizational level trust. This is my bank account. So there's standards out there. One of them is complicated and called client-initiated back-channel authentication. But what an end user sees is really simple. If I go to this investment website and I add my Standard Bank bank account, the user is going to, in their Standard Bank app at that moment in time, get an authentication request. They're going to approve it. They're going to use their biometric authentication, and they're going to be signed into the investment site, and access is going to be granted to their bank account of choice. Now, that sounds straightforward, but the underlying security through it, where the end user is telling the parent organization, I trust that company, that exists today. And we're seeing it being used more and more in the banking sector. I keep using the banking sector. Obviously, the banks have probably our most sensitive data. But we're seeing these kinds of open business initiatives extending outside of the financial sector to retail and to other areas. So again, I think digital transformation and security's ability to think ahead of the curve and to create intelligent and novel security abilities is going to make the lives of consumers easier and safer. Today, a lot of it's handled through agreements, these contracts with third parties. I hope in the future we can put real security controls that make the life of the user in place.
Well, let's go through the presentation.
Thanks, Tim. So thus far in the presentation, we'd started talking about some of the challenges that we're all facing in the industry at the moment, whether we're business owners, whether we work in organizations, whether we're customers of business, or whether we're security people. We then touched on how zero trust is this great concept that exists out there in the security world to simplify security and focus it down on the identity, but it's not that easy. There's challenges to doing it. We gave some examples about how just when looking at a person in an organization and the access that they need, that it's not easy to be able to define who they are and whether that access is right for their roles. But then we spoke somewhat about how disruptive technologies, like, for example, peer group analysis, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, can help us automate some of these things. And as soon as we have these levels of automation in place, going back to our original problems, we're not putting the burden on business people, and we're making security more effective, and we're making ideas like zero trust possible. So going back to the beginning, just summarizing the impacts we're facing, the pandemic has changed IT's landscape forever. Things were already happening in IT. People were adopting cloud services. People were no longer having big legacy systems on premise anymore. They were using things that were available through service providers. Buy it with a credit card. Organizations too were trying to adapt to that model and providing their services online with a great digital experience, but balancing that with security. And lastly, organizations were facing challenges like never before in terms of the time that people have during the day to play a role in security, compliance, and governance. Zero trust is a great concept. You'll hear this word, I'm sure, bandied about by security people for years to come. And really what it's meaning is the fundamental thing that we're securing is the person. And we always verify who the person is behind a transaction. We then ensure that they have the most minimal amount of access that they need. And then using intelligence, we become risk aware. And if something changes about a person, if they become more risky, we put heavy controls on them at that point in time. And when they're less risky, less controls. This is possible, and I hope during the presentation today I've been able to share with you a number of use cases as to how we're seeing South African customers do these things already. But the examples we gave isn't the end of the story. We've been talking a lot about people and their access, and that's a topic at the top there called identity governance and administration. But we're also thinking about how do we secure devices. Organizations have trucks in the mining sector. These trucks have thousands of instruments just on one truck, and each truck needs to talk back to a head office, potentially in Germany. There's security implications in this. And of course, there's consumers. A lot of my use cases today, we're thinking about people that work in a company, but what about the customers of that company? So the concepts of zero trust, the application of disruptive technology to be able to do this security better is something that we at Altron Security are thinking about all the time across a variety of different identity profile types. And I also touched on earlier during the questions and answers around how identity really is the center of everything. If we want to break down IT and secure the most fundamental thing, it's about the people. Of course, a person could also be a robot, could also be a device. It's about the identities. And then secondly, wrapped around that, it's about the data we have about those identities in relation to POPIA, but also about the information an organization has. Digital transformation means we're collecting data faster than ever before, and getting in control of what we need to secure and what we don't need to store is vitally important business conversations. Thirdly, from Altron Security, we also help organizations secure this new cloud world. Not only are we having services out there that need a whole different approach to security, and zero trust is one of them, but also we've got this new edge in the cloud. It's this home that people are working from, which doesn't have the strong security we had on our corporate networks before. And then lastly, skills is a huge gap here in South Africa. Globally, cybersecurity is an area that is under-resourced across the world. From an Altron Security perspective, our role is to partner with customer organizations to be able to do this stuff for you. We're there to be your partner to help you understand the challenges, but we're also there in the long term to address it. And I think, Tim, with that, at a high level, that's my presentation today. Thanks very much for the opportunity to share that
thanks
with you.
very much, Andrew. I appreciate it. You know, I was actually thinking now outside the business environment, but thinking more in the learning environment, because more and more universities are delivering lessons or lectures virtually. Now, that is a community of people that does not necessarily, I'm talking about the students now, who do not necessarily operate online all the time. They go online specifically for learning purposes. But that probably poses challenges to the institutions concerned, because they're dealing with people they are not familiar with as much as those are regarded as their students. Are there any unique learning experiences from that environment of online learning? Do you see any particular security risks attached to that?
You know, it's fascinating, Tim. When I started working with Altron almost 19 years ago now, our first customers were tertiary education, predominantly universities. And the reason is that they got 100,000 people that rock up on their doorstep on day one and need to be registered. That's a massive amount of people that suddenly need access to things. And a lot of what we learned was around how do we manage those student populations. Also, universities and distance learning organizations are struggling with something else as well. And that is that many times the people that are doing the teaching aren't in the organization at all. They're coming from visiting academics through partnerships with other organizations, other learning facilities. So certainly the ability to be able to identify a person is just vitally important. And now we need to identify people and create a relationship with them, having never met them and not being able to physically interact with them. So something that we've been seeing growing in utilization here in South Africa, it started as an electronic know your customer ability. When you wanted to sign up with a telecommunications provider or with a bank, you know, we've got these rules like FICA and RICA that says you need to be identified strongly. Well, there's good, solid digital ways of being able to do that now. We can use facial recognition. It's not just a picture of your face, it's various aspects of your face. In fact, we can use what's called genuine presence abilities to be able to shine light on a person's face, to be able to identify that they're really there in front of the computer, that it's not something we're injecting into the webcam. To be able to initially create a relationship with someone. We can triangulate that information with Home Affairs. We have these abilities today to take the biometric data that we can get in this conversation today and compare it with Home Affairs to know that that really is the learner behind the transaction. Much of this is used maybe not in the learning, but perhaps more in the examination space. When proctoring is required, and we need to make sure that that is the person behind the exam. But I think you certainly touched, Tim, on the leading edge there of digital transformation, where the most impact of digital experience can be brought to be able to help people to be able to learn more rapidly.
So, something topical, and I think it came even out of the budget speech yesterday, where the Minister of Finance mentioned challenges at managing immigration and customs at the ports of entry. That is South Africa's problem, as we know. They have to process so many people and so many machines, trucks and goods, but we're battling as a country to deal with that. If you were, as a security person in this space of cyberspace, what do you think the country should be doing if you were to advise the customs people, the SARS people, and the Home Affairs people that these are the things they should look out for and this is how they should go about it? Where would you say they should start?
Yeah, and I'm gonna add a little bit more to your question, if you don't mind, Tim, before I answer it. And that is, we've spoken a lot today about who I am and what data organizations have about me. And I gave a lot of use cases about the banks and the telecommunication providers, and we trust them. Inherently, we have trust because they have very sensitive information behind us. But is it right that we look to them often as the owners of our data? You know, if somebody wants to verify who I am, often I get an SMS to my phone. But did we ever ask the telecommunication providers whether we could use their infrastructure as a method to identify who I am? We didn't. And working with those organizations, I happen to know that often they sit back saying, sure, it's a huge responsibility for us to own all the data. Who owns our data? Who owns the ability for me to identify who I am? Ultimately, it's me. And that's where we should be going to here. How do we give the power to the consumer, to the citizen, to identify themselves. So exactly as you said that in use cases like at border crossings, potentially in the future, being able to prove vaccination certificates, how do we do that in a digital way? And who's responsible for that? So are we taking it now from the large South African enterprises to government? How do we even take it one step further and truly make it the responsibility of an individual? So there are initiatives out there in the world at the moment. One of them is called Sovereign, and it's a concept of self-sovereign identity. And it's trying to make use of a variety of technologies like the blockchain to be able to allow individuals to put information about them in a place where we know they put it there, and to be able to freely choose who they share it with, and only those individuals, and take that information back when they don't want that information to be shared anymore. So maybe I didn't answer your question there. Maybe I jumped quite far ahead to talk about a utopic future that we could get to one day. I think there's initiatives out there to be able to get to that future. But practically looking at the next 3 years, how do we solve challenges like border crossings? Well, we have a fantastic thing in many of our hands at the moment, and that's our national ID card. The technology inside of our national ID card is of a very high level of security. There's abilities in there for us to identify ourselves already. And I think we do need to be taking a look a lot more at how we leverage the existing capabilities that we have. Governments invested significantly in that national ID card, and being able to use it to prove our identity and share information, I think would be a great success.
Let me ask from the media point of view, right? Because most media organizations now want you to register with them if you want to receive news or information, but they never tell you what they're going to do with it, right? And because information is made to seem like it's free, but you still have to share your data with the particular organizations. What's your view of how this information is gathered, and what should end users be mindful of? Because you never know what happens behind the scenes once you've shared so much of your personal information. What happens to it? What do the organizations do with it?
Absolutely. And you know, Tim, it's a conversation that even we inside of Altron are having today, is making sure that we know the information that we're collecting about people and making sure that we handle that responsibly. It isn't a difficult task. And Tim, I would be reluctant to even begin to imagine that organizations have truly got this under control. I think it's a big problem. I think what we in South Africa have done stands head and shoulders against what other organizations in the world, governments have done in the world in terms of data privacy legislation. This doesn't exist in the United States. It exists in the European Union. It exists in South Africa and 1 or 2 other countries in the world. We truly are ahead of the curve in having top-notch legislation. And this July deadline, where the POPIA Act will now be enforceable and puts obligations on organizations to really take this topic serious and be responsible about the management of information, to be able to know what information they have that is personally identifiable, to be able to handle it in a responsible fashion, and to be able to tell the people whose information we have that information, and allow them the ability to remove that consent at any point and the right to be forgotten, I think are going to be game changers in terms of how consumers' rights are addressed in South Africa.
You can respond to this question, and if you want, if you don't, it's fine. Then we could move to the next question. There's something that I've always been thinking about, that how does it happen that within certain spaces, let's say government, that you have a group of people working for the government, yet they are not on their books, the ghost workers drawing salaries every month? How does that happen if there are all the controls that you have mentioned here? And how can security be used to weed out those so-called ghost workers? We've heard of thousands of people drawing salaries, for instance, where such positions do not even exist. How is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, when we began some projects at, I won't mention names, but large South Africa organizations that are corporate in nature, and you would think would know about all the people that work for them because they're all paid a salary, right? So surely we know about them.
Yeah.
We often found 20%, 30%, even higher of those workforce weren't necessarily known. And the reason for that is, I'm now talking more corporate than government necessarily, but in the corporate world, it's because relationships are often informal. Contractors, third parties, labor broking relationships means that people work in organizations, often receive money for working in that organization, but we don't find them in payroll. And exactly as you said there, those ghost workers cause a problem from a financial perspective and from a security perspective. So being able to identify people and their associated access is just such a fundamental way of solving that. If we simply look at who's got access in the IT organization, because if you're doing a job these days, you need access to something in IT. And we compare that with the people that we know, we'll very quickly get a scary sense of the difference between those two numbers. That requires involvement from line of business up until now to clean. And I think a lot of what I was talking about today is I think the impact that we're putting on business people to try and be involved in fixing these problems are difficult. But the ability to analyze data, big sets of data, and do it a lot more intelligently using things like machine learning are going to make this far, far easier. And Tim, you're exactly right. I think the ghost worker problem within government organizations is something that could easily be fixed if we were looking at the right data to be able to fix it. We know about these people. They're there. Sure. We just need to be able to analyze it.
All right, let's go back then. For somebody who says, I hear you, Andrew, I'm quite impressed and you're giving me food for thought, but where do I start? Somebody who's running an enterprise, but is not necessarily IT-oriented person. What are the points to consider?
Absolutely. So I'm going to talk to an organization, no matter your size, small, medium, or large. Really, the first thing you need to begin with is what Tim and I were just talking about there. It's knowing about the people that work in your organization and knowing about the systems you have and the user accounts in those systems. Start there, start simple, correlate that data together, take a look at what you don't know about. What you're going to find is that there are a lot of user accounts and access in your environment, and you're not quite sure why they're existing. Could be for system accounts, an application log into a database. Could be someone that works in your organization through a third party that you didn't know about. Those kinds of questions are going to ensure that probably in the first 6 to 12 months, you've created a lot more secure organization, putting contracts in place with third parties to ensure that they're managing your information responsibly and that you know about everyone that works in your organization and the accounts they have. Going one level below that, we need to start looking at the access. We can take a look once off at the access that people have. Often what we do is that we ask the important managers in the business, do you know about these people that report to you and the access that they have? And we wash that once. And often half of the access that people have gets removed. This is not only a security topic. In many ways, this is a money topic as well. Imagine the cost saving in taking access that people have to expensive cloud applications away because they don't need it and wasn't relevant for their job. Once we've done that, though, that first cleanse of who's got access to what in our environment, we're able to then start putting in place the really nice disruptive technology-based capabilities to be able to keep the environment clean. We separate our interactions with customers typically in two phases: getting clean and staying clean. In the getting clean, the first year, we're really looking at making sure that all the hygiene is done, things are nice and orderly, and then we want to put in place the automation to make sure that when someone joins the company, they get the access they need. When they leave the company, that access is taken away. And during their employment, if they need more access, they can ask for it, but we add the right risk-based analysis that access is correct. Once we've done all of that, we need to start taking a look at the data. Now we've ticked the identity box. We know who's in our environment, but what about the data that lives in our environment? That data can be all over the show right now. It sits on laptops, it sits on Windows file shares, SharePoint, Teams, and in databases. We need to scan that data. We need to identify what's business relevant and not business relevant. The stuff that's not business relevant, we can delete it. We often find in that get clean activity, looking at customers' data, often 50% of unstructured data is not needing to be there and can be deleted. Again, imagine the cost savings that we're spending on storage to be able to keep this information. Once we know what is business sensitive, we can now really start looking at that and say which of this is personally identifiable information or high risk business sensitive information, and put the right controls on top of that, be it encryption or at least good records management, applying policy to it, knowing when we need to keep it for how long and when we need to destroy it. And that also puts us in the position to respond to consumer interactions that the law requires of us, such as subject matter access requests and the right to be forgotten. So that was a whiz through those two areas, identity and data, but those are the areas I would start.
Well, and there are people who are curious about what else Altron can do for them. How do they get in touch with you as we wrap up? And thanks again for this presentation, Andrew.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Tim. Thanks very much for having us. So I'm presenting on behalf of Altron Security today. Altron is one of South Africa's leading technology companies. We're based here in South Africa, across the rest of Africa and the United Kingdom. Our primary goal is to help you digitally transform and to do that in a secure way. If you want to contact us at Altron Security, please visit our website, altronsecurity.com. My name is Andrew Whitaker. You're welcome to message me on LinkedIn directly, or my email address is andrew.whitaker@altron.com. And thank you, Tim. I really appreciate the time to present to you today.
No, thanks very much. I also got a free online education on security matters. I appreciate it. And all the best to you, Andrew. Thank you very much. And Miles Fourier agrees, says an excellent presentation. Miles, I agree with you. And to all the attendees and those who post questions to us, we appreciate your attendance as well as your probing questions. Until next time, have a great day. And thanks again, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to Altron.
Same to you.
Thanks to Altron.
Bye, everyone.
Sure. Bye-bye.